When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. Welcome to the premiere of season 7 of the Vital Point podcast, and you are in for a treat today. On this episode, I welcome Dave Hodges back to the show. Dave is the founder of the Church of Ambrosia and Zidedoor in Oakland, which is a non-denominational interfaith religious organization that supports the use and safe access of all entheogenic plants with a focus on cannabis and psychedelic mushrooms. The first conversation with Dave on episode 31, a little over a year ago, is still tracking as one of the most popular episodes and one that never ceases to amaze people, as Dave went in depth about extremely high dose mushroom work, far beyond the conception of a 5-gram quote unquote heroic dose popularized by Terence McKenna. And I have to say that this second conversation does not disappoint either. I'd been thinking about Dave and wondering if he'd be into doing another podcast. And then, because there's no such thing as coincidences, he messaged me and said he had some really important stuff to talk about. A lot's changed in the psychedelic world in the last year, particularly around psilocybin mushrooms. Oregon has started offering psilocybin-assisted therapy. Colorado is following close behind. And there's a few other states that are passing measures that legalize, decriminalize, and deprioritize the prosecution of different psychedelic plants and molecules. So the information that Dave is bringing forward here, including research with Oakland Hyphae on accurate dosing of psilocybin, really couldn't have come at a better time. Without stealing too much of Dave's thunder, the main topic of this episode is about how the measurement of mushroom dosage in grams, the way that we're used to, really isn't accurate or valid anymore. In part because mushrooms are getting more potent and the potency can wildly vary, like incredibly so, as Dave points out in his research. And he goes into detail about this in the episode, but there can be more than a difference in 10 times the potency of the psilocybin in mushrooms, not only between different strains of mushrooms, but between the same strain even grown in the same batch. And I remember my mind feeling pretty blown listening to this the first time as he was sharing it. And considering that despite all the momentum that psychedelics are having of coming out into the mainstream and being considered as legitimate medicine, we're still kind of on shaky ground. We're still in the infant stages as far as normalization and legalization. And there are a lot of inexperienced people that are getting interested in working with these medicines because of their new legal status. And I really think that this information is important to share because if it's not integrated into the new clinics and systems that are popping up, some of the people that are coming for these treatments could be getting a lot more than they signed up for. The fact that this information and research was coming from Dave, someone who a year ago was talking to me about doing journeys of 20 to 30 or more grams, really made me pay attention even more. And I really think that anyone who has been or is planning on working with psilocybin mushrooms should listen to this info and take it into consideration when it comes to dosing and the people that they're working with. Now, before I get into this episode, I'd like to briefly share 2 things with you. The first one is to remind you that one of the most important resources for psychedelic work and exploration that you have available to you is your breath. You've heard me talk about it. Even Dave mentioned it during our first conversation last year. And so I wanted to share with you about one of my one-on-one coaching programs, Breathwork for Integration. This 6-week journey is designed to help you unlock the power of your breath, offering you improved clarity, equanimity, and a deeper connection to your inner guiding intelligence. These are all key elements to getting the most from intentional work with psychedelics and plant medicine. Whether you're a beginner to this type of work or looking to get more experience and resources, Breathwork for Integration can provide you with the tools and confidence you need to expand your psychedelic exploration. One of my past clients said that Jonathan is a skilled and balanced facilitator. I felt immediately comfortable with him and really appreciated his thorough explanation of the breathwork techniques, expectations, and tools. Another past client who was already doing a lot of super high dose mushroom work shared that not only had this program helped them feel more calm and regulated in their nervous system, but that it also helped them have the confidence to start their own business, which was an amazing thing to hear as a coach, especially since this program wasn't exactly designed to help people get their business off the ground. So if you're ready to take the next step on your path of self-care, I invite you to schedule a free consultation call with me at calendly.com/Blue Magic Alchemy. And as a thank you for supporting the podcast, mention that you heard about the program here, and I'll take 20% off the price. Again, that's calendly.com/Blue Magic Alchemy to schedule a free consultation call. Remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single breath. I look forward to breathing with you. The second thing I wanted to share is that some really weird stuff happened making this episode, energetically, and just some very odd things. Not only when Dave and I were recording, but trying to get the video off of Riverside to start the editing process, and then in the editing process, and even in the post-production work that I've done, there's just been some really interesting glitches and snafus. And like I said earlier, I don't really believe in coincidences. And I'm not sharing that with you because it makes the podcast more interesting, but just to say, I hope you forgive any abrupt editing. I think I took care of most of it, but the conversation does end a little abruptly. And so if you're interested in learning more or hearing more about this topic, I'm going to link some of the research that Dave talks about in the episode on the show page. And let me know what you think about it and if we need to talk about it more, because Dave and I did discuss doing a part 2, maybe with some of the other researchers from Oakland Hyphae that he talks about during the episode. If you are interested in that, just let me know, shoot me an email or a message on IG so that, we can really give the audience what they're looking for. Okay, and now without further ado, please enjoy episode 67 with Dave Hodges. Dave Hodges, welcome back to the Vital Point podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was really excited when you sent me a message. It was interesting because you had been going through my mind several times. It was like, oh yeah, I wonder if Dave wants to do another podcast. And then it was like right after that thought, this message popped up from you.
That's how it works, and just think about it and it'll appear.
That's right. Yeah. So it's been a little over a year since we did our first episode, which is still one of the most popular episodes by views and listens for the podcast. So appreciate your time once again, and really excited to sit down and chat with you.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah. So what's life been like for you in the last year?
Uh, it's been a roller coaster, but that's kind of how it always goes. Um, probably the two biggest significant things were we had the Spirituality and Beyond conference on Easter Sunday this year, and we've that wasn't intentional, but that is now the new plan. Is we're going to do a yearly event around Easter Sunday, um, which to me makes a lot of sense. Even though, again, I when I booked the event, I didn't realize it was Easter. I prepared to do a sermon on Sunday, and I didn't realize it was Easter Sunday that I was doing the sermon. But Easter is all about death and rebirth, and that is the sort of thing that we deal with regularly with high dose work. So Easter Sunday is our new annual event. And then the other big thing right after that, we opened our SF location. So there's now a location here in Oakland and also one in SF where you can go get your sacrament as part of the church.
That's beautiful. How's that new location going?
I mean, it's coming along. Right now we're being really conservative, so we're only letting in people that have already signed up in Oakland. But we now have almost 85,000 members.
Wow.
So there are plenty of existing members that are already in San Francisco, which is the whole reason we opened out there in the first place.
Yeah. So could you just walk me through like what that process is? Like if I wanted to join Zidedoor, what's that process look like?
Well, you generally we prefer to be referral only, so you would
Okay.
you would have somebody who is already a member bring you in. But you can apply to join on our website, and if we approve you, then you can physically come in, and that's when you actually join. And right now, that only happens in Oakland. So once you physically join the church in Oakland, then you get a card where you can come back to Oakland, or you can go to San Francisco.
Mm, nice. And are there group gatherings that are happening through that, or is it just the one-on-one work that we talked about last time?
Well, no, our physical locations are where people can come get their sacrament.
Hmm.
They we don't have people do anything on site. It's much easier said than done, and it requires at least a 4-hour commitment to hold on to somebody. So the high dose work we do up in the Oakland Hills at a house that we call God Sitters. But as far as like group ceremonies, there's a lot of members of our church, and they all have their own little private sessions with people. Um,
Mm,
you know, we don't really do anything to regulate that. We just make sure that they have the sacrament they need, and that they understand this is all for spiritual use.
yeah. I think the last time we talked, we were recording from that uh house, that location.
Yeah, very likely, very likely.
Nice. So yeah, so I mean, the sacrament, being the psilocybin mushroom, just continues to get exponentially more popular. You know, that mycelial net is just growing and growing. So I'm just curious how that's looked from your side, and what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I mean, it's been growing because people need it.
Yeah.
That's really what's going on. It's from my perspective, it's access to your soul, and that is something that is really missing from the majority of the world right now. Um, People there. I'm not saying that there aren't people that connect without mushrooms or in their own ways. There are plenty of those too. But as far as the majority of the world, um, they're relying on stories of old books and faith versus going in and actually communicating with their soul. Um, and that's where the incredible healing power comes from, and what is helping people get all over all this trauma is your soul knows everything that you went through and knows everything that you're going to go through. So if you need answers, there is something that you can ask that knows everything about you. It's your soul.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been alive to me lately as well. Just, you mentioned stories from books, and it's definitely one thing to read about an experience, but uh, you know, medicine like mushrooms gives you that direct experience, that and it's sudden, it's
Yeah. Well, it's
there's not.
experience.
Right.
It's not, a lot of times I talk about faith in the work that I do and how I live my life, but I don't consider that really an adequate word.
Mm,
It's faith is believing that everything will be okay. Having these experiences is knowledge. It's knowing everything will be okay. It's knowing that you're on the right path and going in and helping understand what direction, why, where, and how,
mm,
versus just hoping that it's going to all work out.
yeah. what do you think are some of the keys that people need to keep in mind if they're starting to approach this work or interested
Well,
in it?
the key is to start small. And one of the things that I said there was a couple big things. Actually, really, probably the biggest thing that's happened in my world is we've started testing all of our mushrooms. And although we haven't fully rolled this out at the church, it's been a giant eye opener, and it's shifting how we're looking at everything. Um, the problem with mushrooms is they vary in potency pretty extremely. Even within the same monotub, within the same batch, they can
Wow.
be as much as a 50% or 100% difference. You can have something that's a 0.4% and another one that's a 0.8% in the same bag, and that's across all the different strains. Anything you have, you might end up taking one mushroom that hits you just as much as two mushrooms in the same bag might have hit you. But going beyond that, between the different varieties, they range so extremely that we really shouldn't be talking about grams anymore. When people talk about safety and how to use mushrooms and things that I've said, and I continue to say, like if you want a good experience, start with a half gram. That's generally something somebody would consider a very conservative um, perspective.
Right.
Well, the problem with that is if that's a half gram of 4% psilocybin mushrooms, that would be 20 milligrams of psilocybin. Now, based on the work that we've been doing with the God Sitters Project and what's been going on, or what Johns Hopkins did, we now have a body weight ratio that would say somebody who weighed 100 pounds would reach one of these breakthrough doses where we leave our body, experience ridiculous visuals, and is where the breakthrough dose starts at 20 milligrams.
Mm.
So a 4% mushroom is 40 milligrams of psilocybin. So a half gram of that would be enough for a 100-pound person to reach a breakthrough dose. Now, on the extreme, on the other side, the weakest mushrooms that we've seen are around zero point 0. Well, the weakest ones that have come through the church are at 0.08%. So the difference between that 4% and that 0.8% or 0.08%, one
It's
of those
huge.
4%ers is almost 50 of the 0.08%,
Wow. That's a
right?
pretty
So,
extreme difference.
right. So what's an eighth? You
Right.
know, what's a 5 gram heroic dose?
Hmm.
What's a gram? What's 20 grams? I mean, it's it is the language that we've used and had and worked with for a really long time. But the problem is people have been getting better and better at growing more potent and potent mushrooms.
Mm.
And what that really means is we need to be paying attention to the psilocybin levels in the mushrooms, so nobody who thinks they're just going to have a good time um, you know, reaches a breakthrough dose and, is seeing crazy monsters when they thought they were just going to have a chill evening.
Yeah, it's such a like my mind is trying to wrap around what you just said in terms of the difference in potency from the same monotub.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
so
Well,
outside of testing, like what else can be done? Is there anything that can be done for standardization?
I mean, that's it. And with testing, the other crazy thing, we haven't started doing this yet, and this is why we're holding back before rolling out the test results. Is we're going to start providing ground mushrooms. So we're
Mm,
going to take like a whole pound and grind it so it's homogenized,
okay.
and then test it, and then we'll be able to tell you this powder contains this per gram of psilocybin. So from there, people will actually be able to dose out an appropriate dose based on their body weight.
Wow.
Because, somebody who weighs 100 pounds and somebody who weighs 200 pounds, they're going to react differently.
Right.
That half gram that's enough for the 100-pound person to reach a breakthrough point is just a very strong dose for that 200-pound person. It's still it's still not the I'm going to have a good time dose, but it's not the I'm going to leave my body dose.
Right.
So
Yeah, I'm also
yeah,
thinking about sort of the traumatizing aspect of like not expecting, you know, to have an experience that's that strong, and just having the nervous system be overwhelmed or, not prepared for,
yeah,
kind of what you're going into. So this sounds like a real big sort of step forward in terms of, being able to work with mushrooms medicinally and therapeutically.
yeah. I mean, that's exactly. I mean it's what's going to have to be done in Oregon for sure.
Hmm.
Although that rates list that somebody sent out and that went viral that everybody was talking about wasn't dealing with milligrams of psilocybin. They were still dealing with grams of mushrooms. So there's,
Right.
this knowledge is still really new. And once those things roll out in Oregon, we're going to get a lot more data on it. Um, but right now, I'm one of the few in the world, if not the only, that's in the situation to be getting these test results and experimenting with doses based on body weight using mushrooms where we know the psilocybin level versus like they're doing in the studies, it's pure psilocybin. So converting the data to help us figure out where these breakthrough points were with the testing. We looked at the Johns Hopkins stuff, and that gave us a lot of insights that changed my perspective. You know, the
Hmm.
the way I used to think and the way that most people think is based on the internet. Most mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, are 1% psilocybin. That's not true at all. And in fact, the most popular mushrooms tend to be less than 0.5%. And when you start getting above zero point 0.6 plus, people start thinking these mushrooms are so strong, you must have put another drug in them. So, the what people are used to is this range of from basically zero point 0.1 to about 0.5% psilocybin per gram. And the, if you readjust everything that we thought we knew, it all lines up with Johns Hopkins. Because when I thought I knew what was up with 1%, based on what I used to think, Johns Hopkins' highest dose was 50 milligrams, which on 1% mushrooms, that would be 5 grams. And to somebody that thought that they knew everything about high dose work, or at least thought they knew a lot about high dose work, 5 grams was really where the work just starts and you're not even reaching a breakthrough level.
Hmm.
So that led me and many other people to kind of write off the Johns Hopkins stuff as, oh, you guys weren't going far enough. Well, now that we're testing the mushrooms, what we figured out is what the mushroom that we consider to be the standard is about a 0.4%. And on the 0.4%, when you do the conversion, it actually works out to be close to about, for somebody my size, to be about 15 grams to get to the breakthrough dose would be 50 milligrams of a zero point 0.3 or 0.4% mushroom. So that was a big shakeup in my world because here we thought like 5 grams could never get you to break through. And
Right.
actually, 5 grams of 1% mushrooms will get anybody to break through.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the body weight ratio. So, how much do you weigh?
Like 190.
190. Okay. So we got this little calculator we're working with. So
Nice.
based on the Johns Hopkins studies, your breakthrough dose, your high dose that they were doing was somewhere between 27 milligrams to 37 milligrams
Okay.
um, total. So in our standard mushroom, um, 37 milligrams is about 11 grams of our loving teacher, right? So that would be to get you to a breakthrough dose. But of a blend where we ground it all up of some Ghost. Those tested at 1.4%. With those, you would break through at about 2.4 grams. So, right, our, our normal mushroom that most people would be used to is about 11 grams, and the strong one is 2.5, which is just, again, it changes everything because we can't talk about grams.
Right.
And just to make it even more extreme, so of the Thai mushrooms, which were the weakest that we tested, it would be 41 grams to get to that same place.
Wow.
So you could do 2.5 grams, or 41 grams to get to the same place. Um, yeah,
Yeah, this is a real game changer. I mean, what's coming up for me is, first of all, thinking about the how much as psilocybin comes more into the mainstream, and laws are being passed, and things are changing, um and especially thanks to folks like you, like where there is more science, more research, more information, more data that we're able to gather. Because I've read on message boards for years, like, oh, these mushrooms are so much stronger, and it's always like, well, is that really true, or is this like just sort of like an urban legend? So like that's like one thing that comes to mind. The other one is just having experience growing my own medicine, those aberrations that I've experienced, where I'm like, why is that so much stronger than the
yeah,
last three times? And I can only imagine in your experience, because you're at such a higher scale than I'm working with, that you've only experienced that exponentially.
yeah. Actually, there were kind of two incidents that led us to really forced us into testing, and the first one was a woman that we work with. Been doing a bunch of work with high dose mushrooms, and her brother actually grew these mushrooms, and they were Ghost and really strong mushrooms. Well, she had done 15 grams before, but Ghost are a lot stronger, and she just grabbed a handful of 14 grams and did them. Um, Hindsight 2020, that was equivalent to about 45 grams of what she was used to.
Wow.
So she thought she was going into 15, she went into
Right.
45. And it was one of the most intense sitting experiences I've ever had. Acacia was there with me. It was actually the first time that we sat for somebody together. Was that night, and we ended up having to get two other people down there to help her, including one of those was her brother who had grown the mushrooms. But
Wow.
during the ceremony, she has cult trauma because her mom left the family for a cult leader craziness. But during the thing, I was the cult leader, and I had poisoned her with something crazy, and just somebody that I've known for years, and she completely trusts me, and we have a great relationship still. But in the
Yeah.
moment, I was the cult leader that has poisoned her, and it took her brother, Acacia, and another woman to get her through the night. I mean, it was
Wow.
four of the toughest hours that I've ever had trip sitting anybody. Um, and so after that, I was like, well, I got to see what these are like. I know what 15 grams is. So
Yeah.
I did 15 grams and I overdosed. The difference with me overdosing is I, I wasn't something that anybody had to deal with. I just don't remember most of the ceremony. And for me, that's the biggest problem with high dose work and overdosing is if you don't remember the experience, then why'd you do it?
Right.
Um, and I'm not saying that things didn't get done and there wasn't a point in that ceremony, but I remember going into it and I remember coming out of it, and it was very intense. But um, I talk about a ratio of memory for people who have done this high dose work. You kind of get a feeling of like, hey, I remember 90%, or I remember 50%, or I remember 100%. Well, that
Mm-hmm.
one was 10%, if that. I remember maybe 5% going in, and I remember about 5% coming out. Um, that's a problem. That I'm not trying to do work that I don't remember doing.
Right.
Um, so that really changed my whole world. And then Acacia and I did an experiment after that to try to kind of gauge it. And we brewed 10 grams and then we both split it. So we each had 5 grams.
Uh-huh.
And both of us said that 5 gram dose would hit about a 20 gram, like right around a 20 gram level. Um, and it was incredibly intense. It was the first time that I had ever done a dose with somebody else doing a dose. And it was extremely uncomfortable, really, for both of us. It was not. Um, if we had known that's where we were going, that's a different thing. But thinking we're going to a 5 gram level and maybe at maximum a 10 gram level is a huge different thing than a 20 gram level. And that's after those experiences, we started testing the mushrooms, and the test results backed up our experience. And that's where things were really kind of eye opening. We looked at them and we went, oh, wow, based on the ratios and the test results,
Right.
that 5 gram dose was, the 10 grams we brewed together and split 50-50. Each of us did about a 18 gram dose right around there. Um, and that but yeah, after those we started testing the mushrooms, and um, the test results backed up what our experience was, and that really um, set a whole new path to go down, where I started looking closer at the Johns Hopkins stuff and noticed that where we felt our breakthrough doses were was lining up with the milligrams for their breakthrough doses that they were doing with their end of life studies. So just really kind of turned my world of high dose work upside down.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm curious what needs to happen in your opinion to shift the paradigm as more people are working with mushrooms, especially thinking about Oregon and Colorado and California and wherever else legalization and decriminalization is going to continue. Because like you
Yeah,
mentioned, it is still thinking about the grams.
yeah. Well, I mean that's going to be this big change in dialogue, and we're doing a lot of testing and a lot of thinking to try to figure out where those ratios should be.
Mhm.
But it's definitely something that's going to be a body weight ratio, and it's going to be the sort of thing too where you know people are not going to be putting an eighth of really strong mushrooms in a chocolate bar. Um,
Right.
to get to that, if you have 4% mushrooms, just to give you an idea of some of the numbers that we're looking at right now. So, um, 1 milligram of psilocybin is a dose that you can feel.
Mhm.
It's roughly about what most people would think maybe a zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.4 is.
Okay.
So 1 milligram of psilocybin is above a microdose, or
Mhm.
it's a high microdose. And the microdosing, we're probably going to be talking about micrograms instead of milligrams.
Mm.
Um, just because that's where the microdose range is where you don't perceive it. And then on the higher doses, so if 0.4% mushrooms are what we kind of consider to be a standard, an eighth of mushrooms is going to be, you know, right around, I think, probably 12 milligrams of psilocybin. Yeah. So an eighth would be about 12 milligrams. So kind of going backwards from there, is where we kind of got to figure out what the dosing is going to be. But I'm thinking it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 milligrams is a dose, and not that's where you're gonna feel like you're on an eighth. But generally, there's a lot of people that when they're doing mushrooms, they'll take an eighth and they'll break it into quarters,
Right.
and that's a quarter of 12 is three.
Yeah.
So um, what that dose ends up looking like, and what that number is, and the new language, we're going to put out standards as the church, and possibly even by the time this podcast airs, we're going to start having some standards that we talk about. Um, but that's what needs to happen, is we need to come up with a standard dosage that's dealing with milligrams of psilocybin, and also provides information about body weight, because your 200-pound dose is going to be different from a smaller girl's 100-pound dose. It's going to hit you guys completely differently,
Right.
and they need to know that they need to take half of what you're taking to feel like we're in the same place. um, that
Yeah. That's one of the
it's
things that's
just
coming
what
up
we
for
have to do.
me. Yeah, that's one of the things that's coming up for me is like thinking of all the journeys that I've done with my partner where we've taken the same amount of medicine and she's 70 pounds lighter than me. So it's like, no wonder it's been hitting her so much harder, like no
Right,
wonder.
she's not necessarily more sensitive. She's
Right.
doing a higher dose than you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. This is like a real game changer.
I know. When I said I got plenty of stuff to talk about, this is
Yeah.
this is the thing I haven't been talking about enough, and is really brand new in my world, but is so important given everything that's happening, and especially the stuff in Oregon, because
Yeah.
their pricing for their highest dose, if that's 50 milligrams of psilocybin, um, that's a breakthrough dose. But
Uh-huh.
they're listing grams of mushrooms, so nobody really even knows what they're talking about at this point. But
Right.
a 50 milligram psilocybin dose, um, for you, that's beyond your breakthrough point.
Yeah.
So before you're ready to do 50 milligrams, you've already had to do. I mean, based on our God Sitters data, which is a little higher than Johns Hopkins, we'd say you're at 38 milligrams. But before you're ready for 50, you for sure have to do 38. And to be responsible, before you do 38, you should probably do, based on our data, we would say 31. Based on Johns Hopkins, they'd say 27. Um, but those are things that are, I'm basically speaking another language to you right now, because
Right.
this is new knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
and
taking it.
it's
Sorry, go ahead.
it's not totally new knowledge. It's just
Mhm.
taking the knowledge that we've known for a long time. I mean, Gordon Watson did pure psilocybin pills with Maria Sabina, and there's some great information that I came across of what he dosed her and what she considered to be a breakthrough dose that even lines up with all this shit now too. So
Mm.
it's not necessarily taking brand new data. The new data is we can test the mushrooms and figure out how actually strong they
Yeah. And is that testing like is that fairly widely available? Is that something that you guys are patenting? Like what how is that going to roll out to other organizations or other, facilitators, do
Well,
you think?
we work with a couple different organizations, but the one that's really pioneered a lot of this stuff is Oakland Hyphae. Um, but that's the problem is we there it's not available yet. I mean that
Hmm.
this is if you have to put this in terms of where we were with cannabis, everything basically started with Dennis Perone and Prop 215 in California. And that passed in the '96 election. We might be in '95 right now relative to cannabis. So, not to say that we can't accelerate that a lot faster than it took with cannabis, but as far as technology level and knowledge of what we're actually dealing with the mushrooms, not to say we don't have a bunch of knowledge. I'm just saying that it's very, very early stages. There isn't a bunch of legal protection all over the place for people to experiment with these things.
Yeah.
And there's few people that have the resources to put connect all the dots. So it's there's a lot to come. There's a lot to look forward to, but as far as like how somebody who grows their own mushrooms is going to be able to know how strong they are, that doesn't exist quite yet.
Right.
There are some at-home testing kits that I've started seeing pop up. I can't tell you if any of them are good, but I know people are trying to develop that technology, so there might be something like that coming in a relatively near future, which you don't necessarily need to know the exact milligram if you can know the range,
Hmm.
because there's a huge difference between 0.2% mushrooms and 4% mushrooms,
Right.
right? That's a world of difference. And if you could tell that these mushrooms were off the chart and these other ones were at the beginning of the chart, that's a lot more information than you're currently working with.
Hmm. Besides for strain, just to speak in general, besides for strain, are there other things for people that are working with their own medicine that could sort of indicate outside of just, sort of the experiential test, like because you mentioned the difference in the same monotub, like I guess I'm curious if one was to use like a clone or like something where they were is that possible or just
I don't know.
okay.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
Though just knowing how the mushrooms work, I doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
My guess of one of the things that's going on is just, like our bodies are not uniform through the entire body. We aren't just from head to toe a pile of meat. There's a bunch more going on in there that it's
Yeah.
a similar sort of thing with the mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
There's places where it's condensing things for different reasons, and
Right.
different either environmental factors like this chunk of calcium that they come across in this one spot in the substrate, to how much air versus CO2 are available to them. I don't know, but I do know there's a lot of factors that we don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's just this is like really, really fascinating to me because, another thing that comes up, just, with the story that you shared about the person that you sat for and that sort of sparked this whole discussion is like, I feel like in the last 6 months for me, like talking with more people that are on the business side of, psychedelics and psilocybin in specifics, um it seems like there's a lot of that at least there's an amount of caution that's being taken into account with Oregon in terms of like, hey, we're still like, yes, we've got we've got the law now in place and we're putting in structure, but we're still on shaky ground.
The universe doesn't want me talking about this shit yet.
I mean, that could be like the
That's,
sound clip for the promo right
yeah.
there. Oh man.
The big problem is nobody really understands what's going on right now.
Right.
You know, we have things that passed in Oregon that are just barely getting started, things that are passed now in Colorado that are basically at the pre-planning stage, have not even begun to start,
Right.
um, and just very little knowledge of what these things actually mean. Um, you know, the press release that group in Oregon put out really was pretty enlightening on how little people really know. You can't talk about grams anymore. To say, oh well, this is going to be your experience at a half a gram, or this is going to be your experience at 5 grams. That's not what we need to be talking about. And that's not even necessarily how the Oregon law works. You know, the Oregon law says the maximum is 50 milligrams, which, um, you know, now with my perspective on where the high dose work is, that's actually pretty appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would say that there are times where people need to go over that, and when you continue doing this work on a regular basis, it's the sort of thing where, you know, Acacia and I have done 3 times our breakthrough dose level and been fine and got experiences out of it. So,
Right.
you know, it's not saying that everybody should never do more than that maximum dose or even more than their breakthrough dose. It's just for
Mm-hmm.
us, that's where the work begins and that's where you reach the breakthrough point. Um, but as far as like even how this works, you know, this isn't, you're not going to go through an experience and instantly come out healed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's going to be a significant thing, but when we're dealing with people that have real bad problems, and you know, one of the things that this high dose work has shown me is we have the cure to suicide. And I don't say that lightly. I've seen it happen. I've experienced it myself. I know what this is. But those people, you know, to get them through to the point that they're going to feel really good about their life and get past all the stuff that has led them to be where they're at, that might be 20 doses. That might be more. You know, so this is the sort of thing that has to be looked at as continuing work. And you know, when you're dealing especially with the suicidal people, it's within about 10 days of their first dose, sometimes 10 days to 2 weeks, they'll need to do another dose, and they may need to keep up that frequency for a few months. But you know, the alternative is they're dead. So, um, 2 or 3 months of doing a ceremony every 2 weeks, to get you past the point where you're going to kill yourself again is priceless. But again, it's not a, you pay $3,500 for a 4 hour session and then you're done.
Right.
There's a lot more to it than that. And even looking for the signs and watching as these people go from, they'll come out of the dose just in a blissful state many times, and the next day just never want to harm themselves and they want to change their life completely. Um, but as the pressures in life keep adding up on them, that's going to change pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, this is all the sort of things that are going to start coming out of what's happening in Oregon, and figuring out how to do this the most appropriate way. Um, and you know, when you talk about like people wanting to get into business in this, there's just so many unknowns with how these things even work and what the dosage should be, we are way too early to be talking about, commercial sales all over the place.
Yeah.
Um, it's that's what everybody wants, but we're not even talking about milligrams of psilocybin yet.
Mhm.
So what the hell are we talking about? Um, and as far as the legal ground goes, you got people in California that just somehow already think it's legal, and they think it's somehow legal for them to ship hundreds of thousands of bars across the country, and there there's definitely no protection for that,
Right.
and there's not going to be any protection for that anytime soon. Um, but it's there is a big fear of something going wrong, and there will be things that go wrong. We
Right.
just need to make sure that we talk about safety as much as possible. And um, as these things are rolling out in Oregon and Colorado, caution is key. There's no need to rush into this.
Mhm.
It's already being rushed into.
Yeah.
There are already people who have done crazy things and got in trouble, and both legally and mentally and physically, and all these things have already been happening all around us. It's when is one going to bubble up to be a big enough thing to really hurt us, and where are the consequences, and how do we avoid those? But the dosing is key, because again, I talk about high doses all the time, but if you actually listen to what I'm talking about now, it's,
Right.
well, make sure you know how strong your mushrooms are, because some mushrooms, half a gram is going to be enough. Some mushrooms, 40 grams isn't going to get you there.
Yeah.
So we really need to start it, really discussing psilocybin, but also being able to test psilocybin and acknowledge the fact that when you're talking about grams, you are not talking about anything.
Mhm.
You're talking about a a number that is only relevant potentially to the specific batch, and maybe even the specific mushroom that you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of those things, like, again, normally, in the past I wouldn't say this, but now, like, what I'd recommend is, if you want to do high dose work, you get a couple ounces of mushrooms and grind them all together, and throw some silicate packets in there to keep the moistures out, vacuum seal them and store them that way. But then, when you're dishing out this powder, whether or not you can get it tested, it will all be the same that you're used to. You won't hit one mushroom that's going to be double another mushroom.
Right.
Um, if you're going for consistency and you want to try to take out those factors. Um, but, you aren't going to die from mushrooms. The biggest thing that's going to happen is, if you do too much, the mushrooms are going to take over your body, and you could do crazy things like run out in the street naked, and in a worst case scenario, try to jump out of a window because you're trying to get away from something.
Yeah.
um, but it's those are going to be the problems that are happening, especially as mushrooms get stronger and stronger, because it's that overdose point. If we could talk about grams, and if half a gram was a safe place, the goal would never to be, for most people, to go over an eighth in a normal scenario. And that's been the common logic that's got us through to where we are today. But they vary so much that's really, especially as we get stronger and stronger mushrooms, those aren't things that we can really depend on, or even consider a factor.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the image that came to mind was like, you know, 12 ounces of beer and 12 ounces of vodka and just being like, well, it's just 12 ounces, like, doesn't
Yeah,
matter. Just give me whichever,
it's alcohol, you know.
Right.
It's 12 ounces of alcohol. I mean,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
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 One is 200 proof, and the other is 5 proof.
Yeah.
So yeah, drink the bottle the equal amounts of both, and you'll notice a difference.
Yeah. So it, let's kind of take the next step, like assuming that um, dosage is being handled in a safe way, um, and somebody that's new to this work is coming in. You mentioned safety and starting slow. Um, the last time you were on, you talked about the importance of breathing. So I wonder if we could like kind of continue that, like for somebody that's listening to this podcast and is like, okay, like I've got some issues and I think that psilocybin will help me. What are some other safety factors? Like what does that look like for them?
Well, if you want to be the safest and you're trying to do this sort of work, but you don't have the money to go to a facility, or we just feel that you would rather, take it into your own hands. I mean, the most important thing really um, is having somebody with you, preferably that's done mushrooms before. And if you're talking about two people that have never done mushrooms before, the first thing, one of them needs to try them while the other trip sits for them. Don't try them for the first time when you're both on mushrooms. Somebody should be sober in the equation, and start small. There's nothing, there should be no ego attachment or no desire to do the most mushrooms of anybody that could do mushrooms. That's not going to help you. Start small, give yourself 2 to 3 weeks between, and just you slowly work your way up with somebody that uh, you trust, that you're okay seeing you naked in a worst case scenario. Um, and just cautiously move your way up to see where you're at. But that's why I'm really excited to see what happens in Oregon.
Yeah.
They and in Colorado, because we need this, and there is a practice to help people with it. The Johns Hopkins study was a great first step, and some of the real uh, groundbreaking entry level scientific work that's been done around these types of doses. But as more of these therapy centers come online, we'll learn a lot more, and there'll be a lot more options for people. Um, where the pricing is concerned, one of the big problems with what we're doing with the God Sitters project, we're not charging anybody for it because we still consider it um, study. And this is where I was at last year too. We've been taking our time and slowly letting a few people into this so that we can see what happens, so we don't accidentally overdose somebody, and we know what can happen in every scenario. And we're getting a lot better to that. And I think really, for me, one of the big missing components was having the test results and the body weight ratio to really kind of safely bring people to where we wanted to bring them. Um, but this is not easy work. We have to, in the protocol that we do, there's two sitters, one male and one female. One of the sitters is going to spend the night there with you. You come to the house, you have the session, you spend the night, and the next day when you're ready to go, we take you home. Another big important thing is we don't let you drive your car there. Your vehicle cannot be there. And things like that are just to ensure that there's no chance that somebody's going to go, I need to leave right now, give me my keys, and have that fight.
Right.
Avoiding those things before they happen is the most important thing. Um, so any way you look at it, two people's time. One of them that is basically got to be with you for 24 hours. The other that during the session is going to be there before, after. What we look at is generally 6 to 8 hours for two people, and then the other person is going to be there with you overnight. Just compensating them for their time alone. If you were paying those people, say, $50 an hour, well, that's $400 to one of them, and the other would be $1,200. So that's $1,600 just in compensating them for their time
Right.
dealing with you in this crazy scenario. And that doesn't, you know, take into account things like uh, payroll or rent or any of the other expenses that could be related to anything else. That's literally just for the time of the people. Um, so, having something where if you're doing it right in the way that we look at doing it, being a $3,500 session, that doesn't seem that ridiculous to me. But that's also, we got two people, and you're spending the night at a place, and the person's going to be with you overnight, and they're going to feed you breakfast in the morning, and they're going to talk to you in the morning about what happened. And it's not a 4 hours, you're done, now you're out, go home.
Mhm.
It's a lot more involved in that. And if you're going to do that the way that I consider to be the most appropriate way to do it, it's any way you look at it, it's not going to be cheap. I mean, the 3,500 would kind of be cheap,
Right.
given the
Yeah.
scenario I just described.
Yeah.
And it's got to be one on one. I mean, you can't
Right.
you with the right facility, maybe you could do a little bit of overlap, but you got to make sure that the person that's in the experience has their own complete space where nobody else can disturb them,
Yeah.
and where you're paying attention to them at the same time, just in case anything happens. So, I could see in the right retreat slash, um, you know, uh, facility that you could potentially get one person or a team of people helping 5 to 10 people in their own little private spaces. But, um, that's something that has to come with scale. And that's the sort of thing where you got to have all the protocols figured out. And like if somebody was just to say, oh, tomorrow I'm going to open this up and we're going to have 10 people on doses at every point in every day, um, that's not going to work. And they're going to find that out real quick.
Right.
Um, so, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot to look forward to. You don't need to go to one of these places, but you do have to be committed to this work, and you do have to be very cautious with it. Um, and the perfect scenario is where you have somebody that's already experienced mushrooms that can at least be there for you. And first, you do a small introduction to them to kind of know where things are, and then slowly work your way up. But it's got to be done with the right respect. This isn't, especially when you get into the deeper work, this isn't the sort of thing you do out in forest or out in nature. This is the sort of thing where you do it in a very safe place with a bed and a bathroom right nearby and all the supplies you could need, water and change of clothes and all those sort of things. And if you do that, you can, with with you and a friend or you and a loved one, you can get a lot of shit done for almost no money. I mean, the mushrooms are really cheap. The
Right.
the, the amount of mushrooms, like for most people, well, especially as they get stronger too. If we're talking about your breakthrough dose could be a gram, then an ounce is 28 breakthrough doses. So, that's
Right.
if you're doing that if you're doing that twice a month, that's still more than a year worth of intense breakthrough ceremonies.
Hmm.
Um, there is something about when you're doing them close together that you do need to increase dosage. So in the scenarios where you have somebody doing it within 10 days or 2 weeks, we actually up their doses slightly because it's about 3 weeks before your tolerance totally clears. Um, so depending, you know, again, this is a lot of the stuff that we know from the experience that we've been having testing all these things for almost 2 years now. But until we've got clinics, or they're clinics in Oregon who are doing these things and figuring out things for themselves, um, there's a lot of standards that are going to be need to set, and there's a lot of experience that people will need to gain and go through. And obviously we're here to help everybody, so it's not, the big difference with the church is we're not trying to gatekeep any of this information. We're not trying to like patent any of this information. We just want people to know how to do things safely and understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where we're coming from.
Which is great, and thank you for the work that you're doing there. Um, in October, I talked with Dr. Saad Al Alamat from Silo Health, and they have come out with a peer support sort of certification that anybody can take for free to become a peer, what they would call a peer supporter. And he talked about having this community support model because not everybody is going to be able to, take a trip to Oregon, and to also to your point, like how beneficial is one or two, doses, even if you did have the resources to make that trip, as opposed to having access to the medicine within your community, having the support of, people that can, be a peer supporter to help you with integration, to help sit for you, things like that. And, it made a lot of sense what he was saying. So, it makes me feel really positive and really grateful to also like hear about what you guys are doing with the church, and just sharing the knowledge and the experience that you've gained, because I feel like there's so many people that are coming into this now that don't have either of those, and they're getting little sound bites from here or there. They may have read an article or seen something on the news and they're like, oh, cool. And there's a lot of misconceptions, and there's
Yeah,
that.
mushrooms are legal now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I really appreciate, what you guys are doing there.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. We're just doing what we're supposed to be doing. But yeah, the community support and teaching people how to do things safely is extremely important. I'm not familiar with the program that you're talking about, but if you want to send me the links, I'd love to check it out. Any resources that we can provide to our members or help disseminate to the community, or that's why we exist.
Yeah.
Um, to make sure people can do these things safely and be as well informed as they possibly can be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. And I'd love to just circle back, because one of the things that I loved from our first conversation was your emphasis on breathing as a support for the medicine experience. And as somebody who, makes the majority of my money right now as a breathwork facilitator, I'm like, yes, breath is so important. So, how has that changed for you in the last year? Has that deepened? Are you still kind of going with the same sort of practice, or what?
For me, the breathing message was really, about a physical lesson.
Uh-huh.
Something that uh, I couldn't deny, and it's really hard for anybody else to deny. The fact that when I first did mushrooms, I was physically breathing wrong. I was, as most of our population has begun to do, breathing with the upper half of my body and not my diaphragm. Um, you know, since I learned that lesson, I really have not had too much other direction on breathing.
Mm,
For me, and the importance of breathing during these ceremonies is really at least at that level, to make sure when your body goes on autopilot, when you leave it, that it's working correctly. Um, because if it's not, then you could have a bit of a problem. You're probably not going to die, but what I have heard is people like gasping for air, and it's again, it has to do, at least from my perspective, it has to do with the fact that they're actually breathing with the wrong muscles of their body.
Yeah.
And now, in order to breathe, their body has to get to the point where it's like, oh shit, I need to breathe. And then all of a sudden,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and
From the
that's a problem.
nervous system perspective, like as we go into that activated, state of arousal, the diaphragm also starts to shut down and constrict. So it's like we're just fighting a losing battle, like going uphill, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, since the last time we talked, I've done a lot of training and education for myself around nervous system regulation. And one of the things that stuck out to me the most, and that I continue to like try to tell people, is, like there's we can make the set and setting the best that we can. A lot of being able to expand into these, and hold and experience, and like you're saying, remember, not like sort of white out in these bigger experiences, is part of it is like, okay, yes, set and setting. Part of it though is just the reframing of like letting the nervous system be supported. It's more, how resourced am I, and how much capacity do I have to hold this experience, that my body trusts that I'm not like dying, or that, in mortal danger in that moment. So it's like less that the experience changes and more that my response and the way that I'm looking at that experience changes. And I would imagine that you see something similar, like say somebody that goes through their first real level up experience, and then like say repeats that same dosage the second time. They're like, oh wait, now I came out the other side. I know I'm not going to die. I know that dragon isn't going to come eat me. Or, I remember you're telling some pretty cool stories last time, the nervous system knows, to trust just a little bit more, and things like breathing can help that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, there's a whole set of layers of things going on, but definitely what I would call the hardware component is what you're talking about, making sure that your body knows how to function properly and is trained on how to function properly, and your muscles know what they're supposed to do, and you're in tune with yourself. That's going to be a huge advantage on the other side, and if you aren't there, those are going to be some of your first lessons for sure, especially if you do this the appropriate way and slowly work your way up. But there that's a layer. The mental ability is a layer too. What the first time you go into it, you don't know what you're getting into, and then you go through it, and you're in these realms that are overwhelming in many ways, and being shown things that are hard to describe with words, and can definitely destroy your sense of reality instantly. So, once you've gone through that and you've come out again, your body knows it can do it, but your mind also knows you can do it. That doesn't always translate into making it easier the next time you do it.
I sincerely hope you found value and inspiration in this episode. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment and leave the podcast a review. It's a simple, cost-free way to show support and help more like-minded people discover the show. Also, make sure you sign up for my newsletter at bluemagicalchemy.com to be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to your inbox. It's a fantastic way to stay connected and keep the learning journey going. If you're ready to dive deeper into transformation through integration coaching, breathwork, and meditation, I'm here to support you. One of the best ways to learn about my offerings is on Instagram at Blue Magic Alchemy, where I post a lot of content to help seekers like yourself learn hands-on methods for their personal exploration and development, just like I do on this podcast. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I would be honored to accompany you on yours. So don't hesitate to reach out, connect, share your journey, successes and challenges alike. I'm just an email, DM, or review away. Let's journey, grow, and transform together. Thank you again for tuning in. Until our next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.